Welcome back to Sports Talk Live Buffalo Plus. I'm Sports Director John Scott, joined as always by our insider Vic Carucci. Bills with an extra day to prepare this week, coming off their first loss of the season. Now heading to Atlanta to face the Falcons on Monday Night Football. Of course, we will dive into that, plus get the opponent's perspective down in the ATL here. Vic, few days to kind of let it marinate even more. Where do you think things went wrong, and where do you think this team needs to respond coming off their first defeat?
Yeah, let's start with where it went wrong. And I think things were headed in the wrong direction before this game. This Bills team was clearly living on the edge in those back-to-back wins against the Dolphins, against the Saints, two teams against which they shouldn't have struggled as much as they did. I think it's still fair to say, based on what those teams are all about. And yeah, the measuring stick from the Bills standpoint is maybe they weren't as good as we thought they were going into each of those games. But I will say on performance, again, on talent, they should have done exactly what they did, win those two games, and they should have gone into that game against New England with the 4-0 record. But you saw some issues. We discussed the issues, John, on both sides of the ball, of things that were a little troubling and that they were maybe doing a little more surviving than winning and maybe getting away with too much. They go up against the Patriots, and a lot of the things that they got away with in those previous two games, they didn't in that one.
Yeah, and we're going to keep diving into some of the warts maybe a little bit later here, but let's start with the injury report because it's extensive. Two guys not practicing. Matt Milano, who was said to be week to week at the beginning of the week by Sean McDermott, so no surprise there. TJ Sanders not participating once again. Then 7 guys, limited participation there. Dalton Kincaid wearing the non-contact jersey, oblique. Deion Dawkins, thumb. Damar Hamlin, pec. Ed Oliver, limited with that ankle injury that's kept him out for weeks and weeks. Taylor Rapp, Curtis Samuel, Dorian Williams, all limited there. It goes without saying here, this isn't where you want to be, but it's good that they have an extra day here. This is just Thursday.
Yeah, and that's how I was looking at it as well. It feels later in the week just because of where your mind normally is on a Thursday, but that's a lot of limited / DNPs on that list, and not unusual to be 6 weeks into the season and having that many guys banged up or show up on the injury list. I think a lot more than that are banged up on the roster, as are players on all rosters. But something to look at, and I guess it reminds us that the bye that's going to follow this game can't come soon enough.
Absolutely. Ed Oliver, obviously, I would put at the top of the list of the most critical to get back to health there. Dorian Williams also certainly with the injury to Matt Milano. Now we're going to take a step forward here and not focus as much on the upcoming opponent in this one. We will have a special pregame edition on Monday Night Football here leading into the game of Sports Talk Live. I want to talk about some of those issues that have not just popped in the loss to the New England Patriots, but that we have discussed a little bit, but I think are kind of rising to the top. And let's start at wide receiver. It obviously was a hot topic throughout the offseason. Brandon Beane dumping some gasoline with his response on WGR 550 earlier in the offseason. But Vic, it is clear that overall they do not have people that can consistently separate and make plays, and that's even with the MVP quarterback throwing him the football.
You know, you wonder if the climate with this team were different. Say, like Philadelphia's, where you're dealing also with a 4-1 team that suffered its first loss in the same timetable as the Bills in Week 5. And what's going on there? You know, you got some players like A.J. Brown very vocal about not getting his targets, and even in winning, you know, where is it? In Buffalo, you don't have that star, so that's one reason a conversation like that doesn't happen. But you do have a superstar quarterback, an MVP quarterback, who I think is struggling quite a bit, John, to find open people. Drops back there, and what does he see? And just by his whole body language, and then when you go back and watch the All-22, there isn't a lot of separation. There isn't a lot of ability that I see of him throwing people open. Some of it's on him. I'm not saying I'm absolving him of all blame relative to the passing game not being as effective as you'd like it to see. But we're, now talking a few games in a row, and when it's happening in a win, you say, okay, well, they got the running game and it's complementary football, blah, blah, blah. Well, the running game wasn't around in that New England game, and now that puts a brighter spotlight on the lack of what is happening with passing game.
And that's what we've seen in some of these losses come playoff time. And that's why we discuss this stuff in week 5 and week 6, because we are forecasting ahead to when it matters most in the postseason. Let's remind you, Mac Hollins was the most effective wide receiver on this team just a year ago. And this man, Elijah Moore, is really the only addition outside of Josh Palmer that makes this group any different. Let's start with the Keon Coleman conversation. He addressed the disciplinary actions that took place in the Monday game or the Sunday game, where he did not play in the first series because we don't know the exact reason, but discipline, according to Sean McDermott. He took accountability today. Let's just push aside maybe the off-the-field stuff, or you can lump it in. But Coleman's pops in the end portion of the Ravens game, nothing, fumble, catches a touchdown, but the inconsistency remains with his production. It isn't as much of him, his lack of separation, or something else.
I think it's all of the above. I think the inconsistency part, we saw that through his rookie year as well, and it's been more apparent this year. And you're right, he had a fantastic fourth quarter against the Ravens, as did Josh Allen. Not coincidentally, they blew up together and ultimately blow up the Ravens in a game that the Bills almost 100%, 99% should have lost. Okay. Then from there, we're seeing moments just like we've seen before, but we're not seeing, again, this consistent guy. Add to that the problems that surfaced in his rookie year, which were this guy doesn't get away from people. Part of what was talked about, a lot of what was talked about in the offseason, okay, he's going to work on his body. He's going to work on his focus. He's going to be a more dedicated guy mentally and physically to making himself a better receiver. And I can't say we've seen that. We've seen physically, yeah, he looks like a bigger guy, but from a separation standpoint, is it making that much of a difference? Is it giving him the strength to push away legally from defenders? I'm not seeing much of a gain there. And then there is the immaturity thing, I'll label it that, but having him not play that first series because of what Sean McDermott termed as a disciplinary action, and it's the second time this has happened. It makes you wonder, it just makes you wonder, are there other things going on besides the things that we can see that are obvious?
Yeah, we will see. I think Josh Palmer also in the wide receiver conversation. I spoke with him after practice today. He's still getting more comfortable, but it's a challenge when you're also not consistently seeing targets as well. I think he, as the big signing of the offseason at that position, needs to be more involved. Let's slide over to cornerback too, a conversation we've also had a bunch of times. But I think we're starting to see Tre'Davious White certainly is not Tre'Davious White, but those who are maybe challenging to take his place, Dorian Strong, now on injured reserve, seeing a neck specialist, it doesn't sound optimistic like we're going to see Max Hairston at any point soon. So the Bills are stuck with Tre'Davious White as someone who is going up against Stephon Diggs, Drake London, and the list goes on.
You know, we knew right along that he would be a placeholder. You know, the hope for the Bills was that it would be a good, solid placeholder, but maybe not one that had to be in there for the entire season, for most of the season. You sort of resigned yourself pretty quickly that this could be an all-year thing of putting him in there, and then what do you get? And of course, the groin injury that started it all, that kind of put him back and kept him off the field from the very beginning, and you begin to wonder just how well he can, how good is he feeling, and how well can he perform to the level that's necessary with, like you said, Drake London comes up this week. The receivers that are on the remainder on the schedule and the ones that they've already seen, there's a guy named Stephon Diggs they had to deal with this past week. It's not going to get any easier.
No, it's not. They're going to be tested against the Atlanta Falcons, but the biggest test, and this is really what we're going to focus on right now, is Bijan Robinson, who's maybe as equal of a threat as a pass catcher, receiver, as a running back, as he is actually toting the ball.
And when he totes the ball, physical, explosive, I mean, open field dynamic, Bijan Robinson can do it all.
Look at that route, Vic. I mean, that's a wide receiver route.
He runs a perfect route. And look, and the way he is put together, he is really strong on top. He's got a lot of that low power that he can generate. You watch him explode through the hole, as I have just on tape. And he's good at picking and finding his holes. His instincts are excellent, but his receiving skills make him so dangerous and forces opponents to make hard decisions on what kind of defensive personnel to have on the field to deal with him.
And we've seen dual threats in Devon Achane.
Yep.
He got a lot of catches in that Miami game, didn't have a whole lot of yards. Miami's offensive line's not that great, but this guy's basically the best of both worlds. It's like, hey, Alvin Kamara can catch passes. Hey, Devon Achane can catch passes. Oh, he can also run like Derrick Henry here. I think this is going to be the greatest test for a Bills defense as a whole. Their tackling is something that I think has really, really been problematic.
For sure.
And I think gap integrity is another phrase with some of these defensive linemen. And if you don't get Ed Oliver or TJ Sanders back in some of these things, now you're thrusting a young Landon Jackson maybe in some action as well. It could be really, really problematic.
And, the linebackers, the safeties, or, whoever the DBs have to be on point with their tackling, because this guy is going to get second level. You just can't you got to just make sure he's not taking it to the house repeatedly. Those kinds of plays can happen. And
we will get more into the matchup itself on Sports Talk Live leading into the game on Monday. For more on the matchup right now, let's go to someone who has covered the Falcons. Vic's chat with Maria Martin from our sister station down in Atlanta. That's coming up after a break here on Sports Talk Live Plus. Welcome back to Sports Talk Live Plus. It's our regular time in the show to get some perspective from the Bills' opponent's side. This week, Vic chatting with Maria Martin from our sister station in Atlanta here. Good to get some perspective, always down there. Tell us about your chat.
Yeah, so Maria, sports anchor in Atlanta, and the place we started was where you and I just left off, and asking her about Bijan Robinson. One of the areas that the Bills have struggled the most is dealing with the run, stopping the run, and of course the Falcons have Bijan Robinson. How effective do you think he can be, just given what you've seen so far this season?
Bijan can be effective against anyone at any time. This is such a special player, and I think it's good that the national media is finally starting to give Bijan a little bit of attention, because he is a once-in-a-lifetime, a generational player, and he can do anything for you. In fact, he leads the Falcons in both receiving and rushing yards. That was one of the things that then Falcons head coach Arthur Smith, when he drafted him in the first round, really enjoyed about Bijan Robinson, was he was a threat coming out of the backfield, and he could make any guys miss. The cuts are unbelievable. He's doing things that a lot of guys are not capable of in the NFL. And it's not just the cuts and the way that he can catch the football. It's also after he is contacted. The yards after contact with this player is so special, and Bijan just continues to get better. And the really cool thing about Bijan this year is all the way back to mandatory minicamp, he told us his goal this year was to get more explosive plays. He's starting to do that, and also not being used as much as the Falcons have in his previous 2 years with this offense. It's very dangerous when you have a player being this effective and cutting back on his usage, because remember, when Bijan Robinson isn't going, the Falcons also have a very good running back in Tyler Algier, who's kind of a bowling ball, kind of a home run hitter guy. He's also someone who is a very tough runner, but Bijan Robinson, a special player. I think he needs to make everybody be put on notice when they're preparing for him, because he is unbelievable at any given situation in a football game.
It felt like Michael Penix got his groove against the Commanders, and then he has these people to throw to, like Drake London, like Kyle Pitts. It feels like once that was rolling, that is obviously an effective balance to the running of Bijan Robinson and their overall running game. And the Bills' vulnerability on the back end is there. Can you see some success that way too?
Yeah, I can. And the dangerous thing when you're talking about the Bills preparing for the Falcons is this offense is starting to figure things out, Vic. I think that's a really good point. And when you look at what happened against the Commanders, it was critical. Not only did they win, but did they show improvements? And it's easy to show improvements coming off of Panthers game. I understand that, because they didn't look good on any phase of the football. But offensively, they did get away from some of that predictability, which was a lot of the criticism around this Falcons offense heading into that game. There was such a big conversation about the way in which they use the pistol, which in my opinion was never really the issue. It was the predictability in which they were in the pistol, what the down and distance was. You kind of knew what the Falcons were going to be doing. They got away from that. They dipped into play action a little bit more, opened up Michael Penix Jr. He was making throws all over the football field, which I thought was a really encouraging sign. And especially for Michael, who we know back in his days in Washington, his deep ball is a big threat. He hasn't really been able to do that so far through 4 games, and that's just because these defenses are not really allowing him to have those explosive plays yet. Once that opens up, I think that's going to be very dangerous for Michael, but just to get that confidence back, that was such an important thing for a young quarterback to be able to bounce back from what was, again, just such an embarrassing performance against the Panthers. And he handled it very beautifully. He got the ball out to a lot of these offensive playmakers that you mentioned. In fact, it was the first time that Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson all scored a touchdown in the same game for the Atlanta Falcons. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about how much offensive firepower they have. They're still a relatively young offense. They've been building on that side of the football for years, a ton of first-round draft picks. I think once Michael starts to figure things out and understand that the intermediate throws are also very important, it's going to unlock something very special for this offense.
To what extent do you think the Falcons defense can maybe capitalize on whatever momentum the Patriots created against a Buffalo offense that looked anything but like itself? Couldn't run the ball well, turned it over 3 times, all both very uncharacteristic things. Do you see the Falcons D kind of being able to play into that just based on what you've seen so far?
Yeah, the big conversation around the Falcons defense is they are much improved. However, I don't want people to get too excited when they say that they are #1 in total defense, because there are still some areas where they need big improvements. Do I think they're going to finish the end of the year that way? No, I don't. They're still a very young defense, and this has been a total overhaul. You bring in a new defensive coordinator, a familiar face. Of course, he's been in Atlanta before, in Jeff Ulbrich, but his ideology about this defense is attack first, and they very much have done this. It is a very different looking defense than the 6 years prior that I've covered this team. And they also have the mindset, both him and Nate Ollie, which is the defensive line coach for the Falcons, they have the mindset of a hockey team. They rotate these guys in and out on the front line in a way that a lot of teams don't really utilize that. They believe they have the depth, especially with some of these younger pieces that they've added, to be able to cause some disruption up front without wearing guys down. That's a big, big key for the Atlanta Falcons defense, and momentum is going to be huge for them. And trying to disrupt a guy like Josh Allen, regardless of the game that the Buffalo offense had, is always going to be a tough task. And they know that. And they've got some spunky linebackers who are very much up for the task. Divine Diablo has been an unbelievable addition for the Falcons, as well as Kaden Ellis, who has been, in my opinion, one of the best defensive players and under the radar players in the NFL in recent years. They know they have a very tough task and a guy that can extend plays really well. The good news for them is they have faced quarterbacks that have the ability to do that through 4 games. Granted, they're not as big as Josh Allen. They're a little bit easier to take down. However, this defense can be disrupted. They've shown you through 4 games that they are feisty, they're willing to get after the quarterback, and their first step is very quick, much quicker than it has been in the past. They've got young pieces up front in those edge pieces that they drafted in the first round, and they've put a lot of work in making this defense look better. And the secondary also going to have to be on their P's and Q's just in case those extended plays happen, which we know Buffalo is very apt to do.
All right, Maria Martin, again from our Tegna sister station in Atlanta. Fun fact about her that I found out during the interview, her husband is former Bill quarterback Levi Brown. Married to him. He was a 2010 draft pick. And the thing that stands out to me about what she just discussed from their defensive perspective is Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator for the Falcons. Of course, he had been with the Jets, and he was an interim coach with the Jets too. But his scheming is aggressive and smart. He too, former player, but he really, and he gets his guys, he's a ball of energy, and he gets his guys to play at that high energy level.
Falcons' #1 defense in all of football in yards allowed per game and 244. We'll see if the Bills offense can try to get right against another stiff opponent. Let's shift gears to a broader view with the division and conference. Following that Bills loss, we finish this edition of Sports Talk Live Plus after the break. Final segment here on Sports Talk Live Plus here with Vic Carucci. I'm John Scott here. This is where we take a little wide view of where things are within the AFC East as well as the AFC in general, especially coming off a rare Bills loss. This is what's on tap for the rest of the AFC East, who will certainly be in action before the Bills play on Monday Night Football. Broncos 3-2, 0-5 Jets, Vic. They're out in London. I'm not necessarily believing the Jets are going to get their first win of the season.
No.
Chargers, Dolphins, interesting. Chargers, you think they should hand the Dolphins their 5th loss. Saints coming off their first win, just like Miami. They get the Patriots. And this is an interesting one, Vic, because the Bills, it's no slouch of a matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. They obviously just beat the Bills. Lo and behold, if New England takes care of business there, we could be waking up on Tuesday morning and the Bills are looking up to the Pats in the division.
Yeah, that would be wild to just think about what our thoughts were before the season, but that is why games are played, and you figure this stuff out. Pats more than capable of going to New Orleans and winning. It won't be easy. Saints are playing a bit better, but it'll be interesting to see what the Patriots' health going into that game is as well. They've got a couple people banged up after the Buffalo game. The Jets, it's, listening to a press conference that Aaron Glenn had, I think it was today, sounding very much more humble than he did earlier on, and understandably so. Like, he never saw himself in the midst of this 0-5 season. And there's been buzz that, is he going to be a one-and-done head coach? We'll see on that. The Dolphins, a lot of buzz there about Mike McDaniel's future as a head coach, and people trying to speculate who will step into the breach there. I think this Charger team, they got to be ripe to rebound and come back and get a victory there.
All right, let's zoom out to the AFC as a whole. Bills still would be the number 2 seed if things ended today. Colts number 1. Steelers, who I'm going to say it, I still think they're frauds, but their division is not very good. Then you see how things stack out with New England there. Vic, I know the ones you wanted to touch on is who is not listed here. That is Cincinnati, Kansas City, and the Houston Texans are the next group of people knocking on the door.
The next group, and Kansas City's knock is getting more faint. I mean, as much as there are some things to like about what they've been doing, but that Jacksonville game, allowing that to get away from that was killer, was absolute killer. And it makes you wonder, is Jacksonville, a team to really look out for? Are they starting to come into their own a bit? That's possible. Houston, I don't know. Got some doubts and questions about them that I didn't think I'd have, and I do. The Ravens, you might as well just pack it in.
It's weird to think that as we look at this, we're only 5 weeks in. I could not have jumbled things up and thrown a top 7 of the AFC standings together through 5 games and had the Steelers, Jags, Broncos, Patriots. I wouldn't have done that.
And the Colts, it's fascinating. I mean, there's some things to really believe in, but I don't know.
And it's still early. I'm going to go out on a limb, Vic, and say we've watched enough football to know this was not how it will end. Just want to remind you, we'll go more into the Falcons and the Bills leading right into Monday Night Football, Monday, 6:30 over on Channel 2. For Vic, I'm John. Have a good night.